Today I have a few quick tips for leveling in the Lord of the Rings Online, and I'm hoping this will be especially helpful to new players and beginners. So let's get started with tip number one, which is going to be on the mission system. Missions are a great way to give your character a quick XP boost if maybe you really want to get to the next zone or even skip a whole level range. If you don't know what missions are, they are basically an instance type where they're about the length of a quest or two and you have one objective in the mission. Some other similar systems in the game, you might think of skirmishes and dungeons, but the benefit of running missions over those alternatives is they are much more rewarding, and compared to dungeons, they can be run solo and are much quicker. So for the rewards that missions give, they have become a great source for virtue XP, and the weekly wrapper quest to do like so many missions a week, there's 15 and 45, these also offer some great rewards. As a leveling character or even just a beginner player in general, it's really hard to go wrong with the character boost selection from the rewards. That will give you a 100% XP booster tome for an hour, and it'll also give you 1,000 extra virtue XP to help your virtues even more. And on top of all that, it'll give you a reputation accelerator to lessen the rep grind as you level. Each mission's faction also has some interesting barter options available, including some cosmetics and gear. Now, if you're wondering how to get started on missions, at level 20 you should get an introductory quest to talk to a mission stable master. For example, there's one in the middle of Bree. And then at the mission stable master, you can take any of the swift travel options to travel to one of the mission's factions. An important note is that you must own the content to play missions. Unfortunately, none of the missions currently in the game are going to be available as a free-to-play player, but if you're a VIP subscriber or otherwise own the necessary quest pack or expansion, you will be able to play through the mission system. I also will point out, as a VIP subscriber, you would have 4 of the 5 mission sets, and you would only be missing out on Gundabad because that's a part of, well, the Gundabad expansion. Now, in this last tip, I mentioned Virtue XP, but what if you have no idea what that even is? So Virtue XP is how you level up virtue traits, and what virtue traits are? They are traits that give your character a stat boost in a primary stat, a secondary stat, and then finally a tertiary stat. You can check out my Virtues Traits guide if you are interested in a build for your character, but the point of this tip is that once you get out of the intro, it's very important to be sure to select an earning virtue that will use any of the virtue XP you get. As you click one of these virtues, as you see in the background, that will make it the earning one. So any virtue XP you get will go to that virtue. And why you need to do this is without selecting a virtue for the earning, all of your virtue XP will go to the first virtue available, which is charity, which is typically not going to be a great one for you. Eventually, you will be able to slot 5 virtues. As you see on my character here, he only has 4 virtues available to slot because he's low level, but as you level up, you will be able to slot 5 virtues, and the ones you actually want will depend on your character, what you want to do with them, your class, and your spec, for starters at least. So a good starter virtue is loyalty, because I find it to be the most universally useful virtue, and it really is just useful for everybody, every role. So I always select that one on all of my characters. With those 2 tips, I do want to point out to stay tuned and get subscribed for my full leveling guide that will have a lot more information on those tips and the upcoming ones. But for the next 2 tips, those will also deal with character progression, and the first one is on clash traits. The clash trait system unlocks at level 6, and the clash trait points that are necessary to get clash traits, those are earned not only through leveling in LOTRO. Actually, quite a few of these trait points involve class quests, and in some cases even zone quests and book quests later on, especially at the higher levels here. The LOTRO wiki has a good list of trait point sources, and I also have a guide dedicated to them. While leveling, it is important to keep in mind the importance of acquiring these for one, but also where you acquire them, because they really are quite vital to your character's build. And for the third character progression tip, I feel like I just have to bring up legendary items. If you're a brand new player to LOTRO, you won't get to the system for a while. It starts with Volume 2 and the Walls of Moria, which are all level 50 quests. Now, as a bonus tip here, I do want to mention you can actually get your allies as early as level 45, because you can run quests such as these up to 5 levels above your character's level. I also will point out they may be difficult at that point because all the mobs will be red, which means they will have a pretty high deflect chance to just completely ignore your attacks. Anyway, back to the tip with the new legendary item system, it's something I honestly would not worry too much about while leveling. Just making sure you reforge your LIs every 5 levels starting at level 51, as this will make the primary affix such as like DPS, tactical damage, healing, all that scale with your level. If you do want more info on the new LIs, I have a few guides on them as well. It is well known that hunters and wardens are great classes for traveling due to their ports all around Middle Earth, but did you know that other classes can actually start to get similar ports starting with Mirkwood? For each reputation faction, I recommend checking out their barter vendors because many of them have return to skills that any class can get, again, especially after Mirkwood, but some of the ones in Eriador as well. The only downside of these ports is they typically have an hour cooldown, and they also will usually require max reputation to barter for compared to the hunter and warden options. And for a bonus tip here real quick, in the LOTRO store you can actually buy a second milestone skill, and one purchase will reduce the cooldown of your milestone skills as well. Fortunately, in LOTRO, all classes can solo all leveling content in the game. Some might have an easier time, and some might even have like a faster time, and some might be able to solo group content even. For a rundown of exactly how each class handles solo and leveling in LOTRO, I defer you to my guide that I just made on that. But the main point of this tip is that I honestly think you should choose the class that is going to be the most fun for you, because in my experience, if I am having fun, I am more likely actually going to stick with that character and even stick with the game for that matter, compared to just like leveling up a little bit then stopping early. So with gearing, I could probably spend an hour just talking about gear options while leveling, so this tip I'm just going to highlight old dungeon and raid armor. Starting at level 50, the skirmish camp has some pretty good raid sets and old level cap gear that costs marks and medallions. Additionally, main hubs associated with these old level caps, such as Galtrav and the Orthanc camp there, they have easy barter for these old dungeon and raid sets as well, for just like marks and medallions. Now I will point out some camps, especially at the higher levels, will have their own barter currency for old raid gear, so you can't use the universal marks and medallions. But I will say these pieces can be great options to fill a gear gap that you might have, or just really kit your character out for the next expansion that you play through. All that said, if you are a new player, you may not have many marks and medallions, and I will say that I don't recommend running dungeons and skirmishes just to get these pieces, as if you are leveling, you'll just quickly replace them anyway. So speaking of gear, what about stats on gear? What is the best stat in LOTRO? Well, nowadays, main stats such as might, agility, and will, those are overall not the most efficient, but that said, vitality is actually a great stat for morale. Now for boosting your damage, what everybody cares about while leveling, in general, mastery is the most efficient stat on a per rating number basis, while finesse will be moderately efficient and critical rating is the least efficient. I go into a lot more detail on this during my stats guide, but what matters more is the percent rating change and how close you are to the stat cap. But for raw numbers, again, I tend to prioritize mastery over finesse and then crit at the bottom of those three, but that is certainly not always the case, and typically at endgame level ranges, it might be different. You may come across white quality task items while leveling in LOTRO. Task items are going to be turned in for reputation at a task board for a certain reputation faction, which is usually just going to be associated with the zone of the task board. Now, task items, they can be worth saving just for this, for task turn-ins. However, in my experience, if you try to save all of them, that can quickly clutter your inventory. Usually, I just end up selling most of mine, and then I maybe keep at most a single stack for the zone I'm currently leveling in. On the note of reputation with tasks, there are also items in the game that directly give you reputation for a faction, especially with Moria and the lower level areas. These items usually have certain quest requirements listed on them, so if you are looking to use them, be sure to complete the required quest. And the tip here is that in my experience, this is often convenient to do while leveling and questing through an area. Also, for a bonus tip here, you can barter for these lower level rep items from the skirmish camp for marks and medallions. Other than faction specific rewards, getting to kindred reputation in LOTRO is actually really useful because it can give you a massive 50 LOTRO points just for one faction. So that really adds up to a lot of potential LOTRO points from reputation. So in not just LOTRO, but any MMO, everybody loves saving potions for when you really need them, just to find out you saved them for too long that they are now useless, right? Well, for all consumables with a minimum level, this includes things like food, potions, and scholar scrolls, I recommend just going ahead and using them whenever you need. I personally have had a problem with this for a long time. And on top of that, for morale and power potions below level 105, you can actually get them very cheaply from the skirmish camp. Now for premium boosts, such as attack damage and morale tomes, these are the type that are more worth saving for a specific scenario where you really do need that boost to succeed. For crafting, in LOTRO that used to be much more necessary to max out your character, but the trend in modern day LOTRO is for it to not be required. That said, crafting your own stuff can be very useful. For this tip, often the best gear available below level 50 is from crafting actually. After that, many of the crafted sets will either need to be bartered from some zone or expansions like Reputation faction, or up to level 95 from a crafting guild. Past level 95, it gets pretty inconsistent, and what I tend to craft and have crafted is typically going to be things like your class slot item, ranged weapons, shields, and offhand weapons. But some expansions like Minas Morgul at level 130 kind of randomly have really nice one-off crafted pieces. If you are leveling your first character, Explorer can be a great choice because you can craft both light and medium armor, but you can also gather both logs and ores as a forester and prospector. Explorer is the only vocation with both of those gathering crafting professions. While leveling, you might come across items you do not want. You can hold the Alt key and press R to open the filter. From here, you can not only filter items like loot boxes here, but you can also filter sounds and quests that you come across and just don't want to hear or see again. You can do quite a bit of customization for the user interface in the Lord of the Rings Online. Even if it doesn't scale well with Reputation, you can at least move stuff around by holding Control and pressing the / key. And did you also know that you can actually save and load your UI layout by typing /UI layout save and then name as the next word, and then /UI layout load and that same name to load it. This can be great if you are leveling multiple characters so you don't have to set up your UI on them individually. I always recommend players try to run dungeons or instances while leveling, if you are interested in that sort of thing at least, but I will admit it can be really hard to find groups for them while leveling. But for this tip, the point is that I want to point out that Angmar and Moria instances have a lot of deeds associated with them that happen to give virtue XP and of course LOTRO points. So even if you're over leveled and go solo these Angmar and Moria instances, they can give you tons of virtue XP and maybe even some interesting cosmetic armor and weapons while at it, and it's something I do recommend trying to do if you want that. And we finally made it to my final tip, and this one I just want to stress that you can level however you want in LOTRO. You can go to whichever zones you want, you can skip whatever content you want, and you can make sure you always play through the certain part of LOTRO, and just choosing whatever class or spec you want to go through all that. The point of this guide is to help you with your leveling experience, but honestly, if it's your preference, you can just ignore it and again, level however you want to. So as a bonus tip, I have many other LOTRO guides for both content and classes, 2 separate playlists on YouTube for those actually, and I will link all the reference guides in the video description if you're interested in learning more about those topics. Also, I am working on a very much so in-depth leveling guide coming up somewhat soon, but that is a very big project and I really just decided to make this quick guide in the meantime because that has been delayed so long. So with this guide, I hope you all did enjoy it and learned something useful, and if you did, please consider liking and subscribing for more or becoming a channel member to support the content, and thanks for watching everyone.